Hello, I'm William Kent Krueger, and this is the story behind the stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
William Kent Krueger.
Well, thanks for tuning in today to Author Stories. I really appreciate you tuning in each day to listen. This is episode 444. We're approaching that 450 number quickly. We'll hit it next week. So thank you for tuning in for all of these episodes. Today, I have a phenomenal show for you. William Kent Krueger is my guest today. He has a brand new book out today, and it's called Desolation Mountain. We actually recorded this interview back in the spring, in May, I believe it was. And I was really excited to get to spend some time with him. And, so we did it several months early. But I listened back to it today as I was editing it and getting it ready to go out. And I got all excited again because this is such a great interview. There's so much writerly wisdom in here. And if you're a fan of the books and mystery series and police procedurals, you're really going to love this book. So thanks for all that you do at hankgarner.com. There are links where you can subscribe to the show. They're over in the right-hand sidebar. And thank you for visiting our sponsors. They help to make the show happen. If you're a fan of audiobooks, you can go to audibletrial.com/Hank and sign up for a free trial and get a free audiobook, including a copy of an audiobook from today's guest. audibletrial.com/Hank. No matter whether you wind up signing up for the Audible service and keeping it or not, the free audiobook is yours to keep forever. Go visit audibletrial.com/Hank and get your free audiobook today. Also, the Association of Independent Publishing Professionals, the AIPP, is there to help you build your indie publishing team. You know, indie publishing seems like a solitary endeavor, but really most people wind up building a team of folks that they can trust and depend on, and that help make up their publishing process. And at the AIPP, you can find people that maybe you need an editor, maybe you need a proofreader, maybe you need a cover designer, and it goes on and on. If you are producing an audiobook, maybe you need a voice actor. At the AIPP, you can find all of those people to fill out your indie publishing team. Go visit them today, AIPPonline.org/members. Also, thanks to Jonathan Yanez for sponsoring the show. His Gateway to the Galaxy series is one of the best sci-fi series that I've ever read. Sci-fi adventure. If you love a great adventure story set in space, think Stargate meets Green Lantern. It's fantastic. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, the Essence series by Nick Breaker. If you're looking for sci-fi with heart, this is an excellent series. There's a link to it in the show notes. There's 2 books in the series out now. Third one is coming up very quickly. Go get into it now and finish the series. Thanks to all of our sponsors. At the end of the show, we're going to have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaps, the Jason Crane series. Enjoy the show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have William Kent Krueger on the show with me. But you go by Kent, don't you?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the show, Kent. For folks that I think everybody probably knows who you are, but Kent is the author of the Cork O'Connor Mystery Series, and book 17 is coming out here in just a couple of days. So we're really excited. Welcome to the show, Kent.
A pleasure to be with you, and much appreciated the invitation.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, this one's easy. So my father was a high school English teacher. And I don't know about the English teachers who might be listening to this broadcast, but if they were anything like my father, they were storming around the house ranting something like, "Nobody uses dictionaries enough. Nobody uses dictionaries enough." So when I was in the third grade, I wrote a short story called The Walking Dictionary, which was, in fact, about a dictionary that didn't think it was being used enough. It magically sprouted legs so that it could toddle off into the world and go to the people that needed it. My third grade teacher oohed and awed over that story. My dad went gaga over that story. So honestly, Hank, in the third grade, I knew I was destined to be a writer.
I love that so much. My oldest son, Ian, when we're recording this, he graduates tomorrow, and to be an English teacher. He already
Good for
has,
him. Good for him.
he already has, he got several job offers a couple of weeks ago, and he's already signed, with a school, and he gets to walk in graduation tomorrow. And, I think, my wife and I are kind of, I think we kind of raised him to be a little neurotic like that. So I think he's just like your dad, but he's kind of had a lifetime of training for it. So that's awesome.
Well, in my opinion, he is setting himself up to be an important person in the lives of many students.
Well, Kent, I'm glad you said that, because so often on the show, when I ask people that first question, because I like to get down to kind of that primal kernel of where people first fell in love with the craft. And, I think that a lot of writers are born storytellers, and I think there are a lot of people out there like that, and they may or may not go on to write the great American novel. But they're storytellers. There's something inside them, that just needs to tell stories. And a lot of times when people start talking about that, they will remember a person, or sometimes it's more than one person, but someone that recognized that thing in them and encouraged them. And it may, to the adult, it may have just been a throwaway line that they never thought of again. But that one piece of encouragement absolutely launched a young person's, desire to do something with it. And so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think so often that one line or kernel of encouragement comes from teachers.
Yes. And if we're lucky, it comes from a parent. Sometimes I think parents are maybe too close to the kid, we're worried about them not getting in traffic and dying, to worry about.
Hank, whenever a parent comes up to me and says, my son or my daughter, and my advice to them always is simply encourage, encourage, encourage.
Yeah, it costs nothing to encourage a kid, and it really doesn't. But you never know, what dividends are going to pay out, for the rest of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And you had a parent who was a teacher, and it sounds like that your dad was a huge encouragement to you as well.
Indeed, he was. Here's a confession coming from a mystery writer. Before I began to write mysteries, I didn't really read them, and that was because of my father, the high school English teacher who did his best to raise his children on literature, with a capital L. So when I was growing up, I didn't even read the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew. In fact, my father basically spoke about mysteries as the poor stepchildren of literature. But the thing that pleased me immensely once I became a writer and did pretty well at it was that my father was probably my biggest fan.
That. Well, your mysteries have a literary flair. I don't really like to talk about the the things that distinguish literary fiction from genre fiction a lot, because I think there are some kind of old staid attitudes that go with that. But there's a certain lyrical prose, I think, that people attribute to literary fiction. And your books have that. And so I definitely can see your father's influence in raising you to appreciate things that aren't just cliche. I don't, so anyway, that, do you feel his influence there?
I do, but I see it I see that, that kind of care in language in so many of the authors that I read in the genre. And like me, and when I talk to them, what we all try to do first and foremost is write good, compelling story. One that pleases us artistically. And so we're going to be careful about our language and our character development and our evocation of place and maybe the themes that we try to develop. And then we want to make sure that we've done a good mystery on top of that.
Well, we talk about so often that we're all telling human stories. We're trying to talk to each other about the human condition and what it is that makes us who we are and how we interact with others. And then genre is kind of the window dressing on that. It's how we connect with a certain type of reader, maybe. But we're all trying to get down to what makes us who we are.
Yeah, one of the things I love about mysteries is that it's popular fiction.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I turned to it when I finally got tired of trying to write the great American novel and wanted to write something that people might actually want to read. I looked around me to see what people were reading. And Hank, everybody reads mysteries. It's a genre whose appeal cuts across all socioeconomic levels. And so turning to mysteries was eye-opening for me in so many ways. And it is so nice now to write in a genre that I know people want to read.
Yes. And that is getting the respect it's due. When mystery is so popular and is so mainstream, and I mean that in the best way, not in, a snobbish way. But it's really appreciated. And when people appreciate your work, that makes for a better experience.
Oh, for them and for the writer.
Exactly.
So I often hear the term popular fiction used in a pejorative way.
Right.
Oh, he writes popular fiction. Hank, I would love to meet someday an author who's proud of writing unpopular fiction,
Exactly. Well, the Beatles wrote popular music, and 60 years on, I don't see anybody turning their nose up to Paul and John.
And Dickens wrote popular fiction.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So, Kent, did you, I know from the third grade on, you knew that you were going to do this, but did you pursue this as a career, immediately after school, or did you, go and do something else before coming back to writing?
Oh, I did everything else.
As most of us do.
Along with writing. I've always written, so my regime has always been to write every morning. But while I was doing that, I was also holding down jobs that would help pay the rent. So I logged timber and worked construction for many, many, many years. I was a mid-level bureaucrat. I did try my hand at freelance journalism for a very brief period and found that not at all to my liking, because fiction was what I wanted to do.
Did you, excuse me. When did you first discover mystery fiction?
Do I discovered it without really realizing that it was a genre. So, so Arthur Conan Doyle, I got turned on to Arthur Conan Doyle when I was like 12 years old, but I didn't realize that it was a part of a genre, a greater
right.
body of work that a lot of people were doing. then I remember when I was a senior in high school, I went out to a football game Friday night, and I came home after the dance, and it was quite late, and my father was sitting in front of the television, and he was watching this black and white film that starred Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and turned out to be The Big Sleep. So I sat down and watched it with him, and he said, "Oh, it's just it's just made from a trash mystery novel." But I love the movie, so right away I went out and I picked up Raymond Chandler in The Big Sleep, and I just got started on Raymond Chandler. But I was reading him not because he was part of a genre, but because he just was a great storyteller. He was really just a terrific writer.
Tell me about your love of Ernest Hemingway.
Well, again, that was my father's influence. When I was a senior, he insisted that I read Hemingway, and I fell madly in love with the guy. Read everything I could by him and about him. And the truth is, although I loved Hemingway's writing, what I really fell in love with was that mythic image of Ernest Hemingway. I mean, here was this guy who was he'd volunteered in the Italian army long before the United States got involved in World War I. He drove an ambulance. He was wounded, got a medal for it, and after that he hung out in Paris with all the great names of the lost generation. He befriended matadors. He was a big game hunter, a legendary brawler and drinker, and he'd been given the Nobel Prize for writing a kind of fiction nobody had ever written before. So when I was 18 years old, I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway. And so I spent the first probably decades of my writing life trying to write the great American novel a la Ernest Hemingway.
Well, does that, there a lot of people have that dream, but does that even exist anymore? The great American novel in that sense? It seems that
it never existed.
Yeah,
it never
exactly.
Existed.
But we all have this idea of it.
Oh, sure. Like we have an ideal of God. And it's sort of different for everybody.
Exactly.
And even though we're not exactly sure what that is, that's what we strive towards. So, yeah. I think what we strive toward is writing a novel that will stand the test of time.
Right.
And that somehow is an evocation of America in some way, shape, or form.
What do you think you took away from Hemingway's style that maybe you've incorporated into your own, or maybe how do you feel like that he influenced the way you write? Is it maybe his love of getting down to the heart of the matter and not wasting any words?
Well, he certainly was a terse artist.
Yeah.
And so. And his his style is just that bold, declarative, one statement after another that leads to a much larger and beautiful paragraph. His ability to create a rhythm with what he did, and just that one sentence after another sentence. If anybody wants to understand Hemingway and get a really great idea for what he did, they should read the opening paragraph to A Farewell to Arms, one of the finest opening paragraphs of any American novel, I think. And so what I have taken away, I don't write like Hemingway anymore, but one of the things that I keep in my mind's eye as I'm writing is cadence and choosing exactly the right word as opposed to 2 or 3 words to do the trick. So I guess that's about where I end.
What part of the world did you grow up in?
All over. I was a gypsy kid. So I lived in like 7 or 8 different states growing up. I went to about a dozen elementary schools and high schools before I graduated.
I'm always interested to hear how a sense of place and maybe a writer's roots tend to affect their writing, or maybe come out in how we see the world or how we portray the world. Do you feel like that being a kind of a rootless kid affects do you think that comes out in your writing or how you portray characters?
One of the things that my background has allowed me to do is have an understanding of all kinds of settings. So I spent time in large cities. I spent time in small towns. I spent time on farms. So when I go back to my writing, I have this broad experience to draw on when I'm creating a sense of place. My heart, in truth, belongs to the Midwest because I spent my adolescence in small towns and on a couple of farms in Ohio. And so I love it when I create a story that has a Midwest setting because I'm really throwing my heart into it. Now, that said, when I finally moved to Minnesota, St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live now and have for the last 35 years or so, I fell madly in love with Minnesota. And for the first time, felt like I had found a place I could call home. So when I write about Minnesota in my Cork O'Connor novels, and I write about northern Minnesota, the great North Woods, I'm writing about a place that I have fallen deeply in love with.
That is a harsh environment, I would think, for especially if people are not from there. Your first year in Minnesota could probably be pretty shocking, couldn't it?
Well, it could certainly be eye-opening if you're not prepared for it. Yeah, winters can be hard here, but it keeps the riffraff out, Right. What you learn when you move to Minnesota, there's so much to admire and love about Minnesota. It's stunningly beautiful, both the northern wilderness areas, the great North Woods, out of which, Paul Bunyan stepped with Babe. The southern part of Minnesota is agrarian and beautiful in its own Midwestern way. Winters are hard and long, and when spring finally comes, we sort of celebrate like our ancestors of old. we get pretty wild here. You have to know what you're dealing with, but once you understand the weather, how to prepare for it, how to dress for it, it's just fine. It's 60 below wind chill here, and people are still out doing stuff. We just dress for it, but we don't let the weather stop us from going about our daily lives.
We say a similar thing in South Mississippi where I live about keeping the riffraff out. People love our 3 weeks of spring and fall, but our 8 months of summer where you have to grow gills to survive the humidity. That's people don't stick around for the middle of the summer very much. But.
I get that.
Oh man! So tell me about Cork O'Connor. Where did Cork come from, and how did he come into your life?
Long before I had an idea for writing any of the Cork O'Connor stories, I had an idea about a guy I might want to write about. And in the beginning, I knew almost nothing about him, but I knew this: I knew he was going to be the kind of guy who was so resilient that no matter how far life pushed him down, he would always bob back to the surf. His name would be Cork. I swear to God, that was the genesis for Cork O'Connor. Now, I told that to an audience not too long ago, and one of the guys in the audience shouted up to me, "Why didn't you just call him Bob?" So I knew I was going to write about this guy who was strong of character, who was resilient, who had a profound belief in certain ideals, and the truth is that the ideals that Cork O'Connor holds to and stands by are the ones that I believe in deeply as well. So Cork O'Connor is a man who believes in justice. I believe in justice. Cork O'Connor is a man who believes that family is the most important relationship you're gonna know in this life. Cork believes that you make commitments, and come hell or high water, you stand by those commitments. That's all out of my belief system. Who I am. But Cork's a whole lot more. Cork is a man of mixed heritage. So Hank, when I moved to Minnesota, my wife and I began doing what everybody in the Twin Cities does in the summer. We began vacationing up north in that beautiful, beautiful North Country. We began spending time at a YMCA camp way the hell up north, a place called Camp du Nord, which is literally across the road from the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, one of the most pristine wilderness areas in the United States, and also one of the most heavily used. When I discovered that remarkable territory, I knew that's what I wanted to write about when I got serious about my writing. When I took a good look at the North Country, I realized you can't write a true story set in northern Minnesota without including the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, as an element of the story, because their influence up there is ubiquitous and powerful. So I decided that I was going to use the Ojibwe culture significantly in my stories, and because I was looking at conflict as a major element of what I wanted to create, I thought, what if I developed a character who he was could mirror the conflict in the two cultures up there, white and Ojibwe. So Cork O'Connor, out of that initial seed of resiliency, the setting up north, the cultural mixture in his heritage, Cork really was born.
I've talked with Craig Johnson, the author of the Longmire Mysteries, several times.
A friend of mine.
Yeah, and we've had this great conversation about how he uses a very similar theme in that Absaroka County straddles, this Wyoming town and the Indian reservation there, and you've got this clash of cultures that allows us to get a glimpse into the idea that we are still wrestling with things that we should have settled a long time ago, and that it allows us to look at ourselves and see that even though we as a society have progressed so far, there are still things that we have to work on, and that we don't always rise to be the best people that we want to be. You are dealing with the same themes there, and do you feel like that? These themes are obviously still resonate with people, but do you feel like that allows you to tell stories that get to cut a little deeper than maybe what people think is just another mystery story?
Well, because I deal so significantly with the culture of the Anishinaabe, a lot of my stories deal profoundly with the whole question of racial prejudice. But that's only one of the issues that I deal with when I'm dealing with the area itself, the people who occupy that landscape, and just the themes that I want to deal with in general. At the heart of so many of my books have been an issue that's important to me, a social issue that's important to me. So I have written about, for example, the rape of the land by deep pocket corporations, which is ongoing, particularly the rape of land that ought to be controlled by the native population. So minings, which is an enormous issue these days in northern Minnesota. The rape of the land because there is vast mineral wealth still lying under the ground there. I've written about the really sad situation that involves the sexual trafficking of vulnerable Native women and children. I've written about the influx of the drug and the gang cultures on the reservation. But at the heart of the stories always is really the whole question of racial prejudice, which is still a profound issue that we all deal with.
Right. And it's sad that we're still dealing with these issues, but I guess as long as we're still dealing with the human condition, these are things we still have to talk about.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
So Desolation Mountain is the newest book, and am I right that this is the 17th Cork O'Connor book?
That's correct. That's hard for me to believe too.
Wow. Did Well, I think nobody ever does, but could you imagine living with this character this long when you began?
Do you know? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. When I began Iron Lake, like most of us who've written long-running series, I just wanted to write a book that would be good enough somebody wanted to publish it. But as I was creating Iron Lake, the first book in the series, I realized that I was creating relationships that were so complex I was not going to be able to wrap them all up at the end of one book. And I thought, okay, so where do I want these people to be in their lives eventually? And as I thought about it, I thought, it's going to take me like 3 books to get there. And that's exactly what happened. The first 3 books in the series, Iron Lake, Boundary Waters, and Purgatory Ridge, form one large story arc dealing with Cork O'Connor, the dissolution of his family, and its reassembling and recommitment of everybody involved. And then I had 3 books under my belt, and I thought, okay, there must be more there.
As a writer who has maintained such a long-running series, well, first off, how do you handle Cork as a person who's kind of living in real time with you, and keeping him his story moving forward? And do you feel like he has grown and matured with you?
He's probably grown and matured a great deal more than I have. Yeah, one of the first and best decisions I made when I began writing the series and realized it was in fact going to be a series, was the decision to have my characters age. Okay, so Mystery Writing 101, Hank. It seems to me that when you create a series with a central protagonist, the same protagonist at the heart of all the books, you have only 2 choices in the kind of protagonist you're going to create. You can create a static protagonist, or you can create a dynamic protagonist. What's a static protagonist? That's someone who never changes, somebody who's the same book to book to book, story to story to story. Think Sherlock Holmes. You read one Sherlock Holmes story, he's going to be the same guy in every story you read after that. A dynamic protagonist is somebody who does in fact change, somebody who ages, somebody for whom what happens in one of the stories is reflected in the subsequent entries in how this character responds to the world. So when I first conceived of Cork O'Connor, I saw him as a man about my age, which was about 40 or 41, I think, at that point. And across the course of the 17 novels in this series, he's aged a little over 15 years. So I'm writing him as a man in his mid-50s now. His children were young. His youngest child, Stephen now, was 5 when the series began. Stephen is a grown young man with a life of his own. Cork's children have grown. And so they've all... Every time I sit down to write a Cork O'Connor story, I'm writing about different people. They're not the same people they were in the last entry. Things have happened to them. They've grown older. They see the world differently. They see themselves differently. Maybe they see the relationship with one another differently. So it's this journey that I'm on with the Cork O'Connor clan. And for me, that's one of the things that's kept my interest in this series, and I hope has kept the interest of readers across the course of these 17 books.
Oh, absolutely. And it ratchets up the tension when you know that Cork is not invincible. That he will meet his end at some point, because we watch him aging, we watch him going through this life. That means the reader is invested in something that we know that this could be the end for him at any time. That's that there's some tension there.
Well, okay, so here's the truth of that. You don't really get a lot of distance suspense-wise when you put your central protagonist in danger, because every astute reader knows that you're going to pull his ass out of the fire at some point, because he's got to be there in the next book. But everybody who's read my Cork O'Connor series, they know that although Cork is safe, No one else is. I have killed off very important characters to Cork and to readers across the course of the series. And so readers understand that when I put someone in jeopardy that Cork loves, and then maybe the readers love, that doesn't mean that they're going to make it to the end of the story, and that's where the suspense comes in. Cork will, I haven't decided if Cork's going to find an ending when I finally decide to close this series. There was one other character important character that I know will have an ending, but it's not Cork at this point.
Well, that was, you led right into the next question I was going to ask, is, you said early on that family is ultimately important to Cork. How do you decide, how to handle his family and his relationships? Because you're absolutely right. No one around Cork is safe. And, that is the ultimate tension is for Cork to live, but the people close to him, to not make it or be in ultimate peril. How do you decide, who gets it and who doesn't?
It's not me, it's the story who just it makes that decision. I wrote one story in which it was 7 or 8 books into the series, in which one of the most important characters to Cork and his family dies. And I received just horrific notes from readers after that, telling me about the grief and what a bastard I was. And here's the story of that for readers who know the book I'm talking about. When I finished the first draft of that story, that character was still alive because that's what I wanted. But when I went back and read that first draft start to finish, as we all do, to make sure that all of the elements are there and the arc of the story is correct and that the beginning works and the ending works, well, I saw that the ending didn't work. It was the ending I wanted, but it wasn't the ending the story wanted. And if I've learned anything at all across all these years as a storyteller, it's that you have to be willing to step back and let that story go where its energy is taking it. So I rewrote it with the ending it currently has, which I knew was going to upset a lot of people, but it was the right ending for the story. So it's not always me that makes this decision.
Well, and what a hard decision that is, and not a decision that writers take lightly. And I think you have to have a certain maturity in your writing to be able to trust the story and know that this is going to upset people, but it's ultimately going to serve the story.
Yeah, and I've already talked, Hank, about the fact that I feel like I'm on a journey with Cork and the clan, and I knew that the journey was going to continue beyond this particular death. And it's been such an interesting experience for me to be right there along with Cork and the kids as they recover from that great wounding. I've just that's been an amazing experience for me, and I hope readers have had the same reaction to that.
Kent, let's talk a little bit about your writing process. Are you an everyday writer? And I know we were talking before we started recording about achieving proper caffeination by about 6 o'clock this morning. Is that your prime writing time?
Yeah, I'm tremendously disciplined in my writing, Hank. My alarm goes off at about 5:45 every day, 7 days a week. I get myself up, I get dressed, and I go to a coffee shop, and I spend the first 2 hours of every day writing. I followed that process for 3 decades or so, more than that probably, and so it's a part of the magic now. So here's the deal, Hank. So getting up every morning has helped me establish the discipline of being a writer. I think that's absolutely necessary for any writer. But for me, it's done something else. When I look back at all of these years, getting up in the morning, writing first thing, what I realize is this, that that even when I was working full time, if I wrote every morning, I was feeding something in me that needed to be fed, and that gave me the energy to go out into the world and give to it whatever I had to give to it to keep a roof overhead and food on the tables, because I'd taken care of something that was really elemental to who I was. Writing, I realized, and it still serves this purpose, is the way I center myself in every day and create the energy to go out and meet the world.
Well, what a lot of people don't understand is that when you are a writer, and especially when you've achieved some success, there's a lot of things that come with being a writer that have to do with your business and your career, that have nothing to do with writing. And if you allow those things, they will eat up your entire day and your entire week. And you will be doing the business of being a writer and not actually be a writer anymore. So that, I think that's gravely important to begin your day, serving the thing that got you there in the first place.
Yeah, when I gather with other writers and we talk about the business, or we just talk about writing in general, we all love the writing. That's why we do what we do. And we all kvetch about the requirements of the business part of what we do. So yeah, I can tell you've talked to a lot of writers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's, it's interesting to hear how the writing industry has changed over the last couple of decades. Because, what are your thoughts on that? It seems to be that, the writers really have to be more in tune with their audience and their promotion and things now. The industry has changed. What do you see, has happened over the last couple of decades that you've been pursuing, the Cork O'Connor series and putting these books out?
Well, social media really has been the biggest change for all of us. When I entered the business, everybody needed a website, but Facebook wasn't around at that point. Snapchat and Twitter and all of these other social media outlets didn't exist. And so while we all did our website work, and we did our promotional work, I still think a book tour is an important part of the promotional effort. All of these other things, the Facebook, the constant intimacy that fans demand with authors anymore, can be daunting and distracting, and it can just suck the energy right out of you if you're not careful. So seeing that has been the biggest change for me with other writers. Now, I try hard not to get myself sucked in that way. So I am very careful about how much time I spend with the social media stuff. And so I write for 2 hours in the morning. I also go back into the coffee shop and I write for 2 hours in the afternoon to make sure that I've broken it up and gotten away from sitting at my computer doing nothing but surfing the web or whatever.
I have a real love-hate relationship with social media.
Yeah.
It can be soul crushing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still think that a blog is the best way to communicate. You can take your time, you can craft your words, and I know that you still maintain a blog where you post updates and photos of events and things like that. And I hope that the instant gratification of social media does not take away our ability to communicate with each other in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah, and that's what a blog does. It allows you to create an essay, and really use words in a powerful way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something that a tweet will never do.
Yeah, exactly. You go to a coffee shop and write. What is it about that experience that does it for you?
Well, it's how I began really my writing. When I got serious about my writing, my wife was in law school, and I was the sole support of the family. So I had to, I had to keep the roof overhead and food on the table. We were living at that point in time a couple of blocks from this iconic cafe in St. Paul, a place called the St. Clair Broiler, and they opened their doors at 6 in the morning. So I really wanted to write. I also wanted to meet my responsibilities to my family. And so I proposed this to my wife. I said, honey, if you let me go to the broiler first thing in the morning while you get the kids up and dressed and off to school so that I can write before I go to work, I swear to God, when I come home at the end of the day, I will be the best husband, the best father you can possibly imagine. She bought it. So there I was every morning at the St. Clair Broiler with my pen and my notebook in hand, because this was long before we had laptops. And so that became a part of, for me, of the process of the writing. Coffee shop, the noise of a coffee shop. People ask me, how can you write in a coffee shop? It's so noisy. You know, I can't write at home, Hank, because it's too quiet.
Yeah. I was going to say, the silence is deafening to me. I have to have chaos.
Oh, yeah. You know, honestly, I've had this experience. I've been sitting at home on a day when I've had the house to myself. It's quiet. I can still remember this. The snow outside, sun, snow all sparkly. It's exactly the kind of atmosphere, environment that you would think would be conducive to creative work. And what am I doing? I'm sitting there going, shouldn't the furnace have come on by now? You know, right. I hear everything.
Yeah. Am I hearing that faucet leaking again?
In the coffee shop, it's all white noise. It has nothing to do with me.
Plus, you get to see people, and as someone who writes characters, there are little nuances or mannerisms or things like that you pick up along the way. That's always good for a writer.
And these days, particularly, coffee shops are communities, so you see the same people, and you form relationships and friendships. So it's a wonderful environment to be a part of.
Kent, Desolation Mountain, the new book is out now for readers to go buy. Tell us about this story, and where do we find Cork O'Connor here in book 17?
Sure. In book 16, novel called Sulphur Springs, I had Cork down in the Sonoran Desert of southern Arizona, because the issue at the heart of that particular novel is the border, the refugees who continue to come across that border looking for a new life here in the United States. But I've brought Cork back to the Great North Woods for number 17, Desolation Mountain. Many, many years ago in Minnesota, we lost a senator, Senator Paul Wellstone, in a plane crash in the woods of northern Minnesota. And
I remember that.
Yeah, and it came just prior to an important senatorial election, his re-election, when the makeup of the Senate was a significant issue, and his death ultimately swung the majority of the Senate to the other side. And so there were a lot of people who had speculations. And the crash was kind of a mysterious crash in a number of ways. And there are a lot of people who continue to have conspiracy theories involved in the crash. Well, I've been thinking about that episode for many, many, many years, and I thought I did not want to take Paul Wellstone's situation, but I wanted to take the issue of a senator, of a controversial senator's death, mysterious death, and use that as the centerpiece around which to craft the mystery. And so that's what Desolation Mountain is. Senator's plane goes down in the Great North Woods under suspect circumstances. Cork is on the scene very early. The first people on that scene are the Ojibwe from the local reservation, because it crashes on a part of the res. And shortly after that crash, those first responders begin to disappear mysteriously. Cork is pulled into the investigation of those mysterious disappearances, and he finds himself deeply involved in way in over his head in what could be an international conspiracy. So it's very thriller-esque, the most thriller-esque of all my Cork O'Connor novels.
Excellent. We're going to send everybody to go pick up a copy of the new book. Kent, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. Desolation Mountain is going to be amazing. I highly encourage everyone to go grab it now. It's available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Kent, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
You are quite welcome, and I so appreciate the opportunity, Hank.
Absolutely. Before we go, where can people find you online if they want to follow along with what's going on with you and new news coming up?
Sure, www.williamkentkrueger.com. And I also have a Facebook page. So everything that goes on my website, if it's important enough, also goes on my Facebook page.
And there are links to your social media there at the website, right?
Absolutely. All my Twitter account and everything.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me today, Kent.
It's been my pleasure, Hank. You take care.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
He led Jason to a small bistro. The door set tiny bells to chime as they entered. The place shivered with smells. Coffee, hot chocolate, and croissants. "This," he said, extending his arm towards a woman in an apron, "is Jennifer. She makes the best scones and is tragically spoken for." He kissed the woman's hand. She was plump, in her 50s. She had left one curler to dangle at the back of her head this morning. "If it's a tragedy to you, this is the first I've heard of it." She swatted at him with a menu. "Why didn't you speak up 20 years ago, lady killer?" Jason sat. Jennifer put a glass of water in front of him. "And who is this fine gentleman?" "This," said Hedwig, joining, "is my son's great-grandfather's great-great-nephew." "That's a lot of greats. Any great-great-great-whatever of Hedwig is great by me." She giggled at her own wit. "I'll be back for your orders." Hedwig swatted her rear end with a menu as she left. He made small talk about the bistro, the specials, what was good, the Benedict, or not so, the hanger steak. When their orders came, coffee for both, eggs for Jason, a scone for himself, he got down to business. "I met your grandmother about, a year ago. Valerie and I have a mutual interest in old families, particularly old families related to the legend for obvious reasons. Valerie's lived in Tarrytown for years, though her family's up near Boston. Now, don't worry. I don't believe all that nonsense about a headless horseman. Valerie's the superstitious one. But the Van Brunts are definitely the family in Irving's story. Hermanus Van Brunt and his wife Agatha were farmers in the village back in 1780 or so. This was during the Revolution. Hermanus grabbed title to lands left by a Tory family who'd been tarred and feathered and shipped back to Britain. Do you know your history? Sure, Tory, loyal to the king. Benjamin Franklin broke with his own son who was a Tory. Smart boy. Traitors to the cause, and that was serious business. The British marched straight through here during the war, chased George Washington off Manhattan and out to New Jersey. And after they were kicked out again, a lot of Tories were kicked out with them. Anyway, the Van Brunts took over some farmland north of Tarrytown. They had a son, Abraham. And, of course, their son Abraham married a wealthy heiress. Katrina Van Tassel. Yes, all that is true. It's public record, just like the legend says. My mother left behind quite a few documents written by Abraham Van Brunt, Brom, in Dutch mostly. He was powerful around here. With Katrina's money, he became the biggest stone merchant in the state. He died in 1850. After him, it's Dylan Van Brunt, his son, Joseph, the grandson, then Cornelius, then... Sorry, genealogy is not my thing. No? Why was Eliza doing research on the Van Brunts? She wasn't. She was looking into the Cranes. That's what made us such fast friends. I don't get it. We do go back a ways, your family and mine. More coffee? Jennifer appeared at Jason's elbow. Hedwig nodded, and she poured. "Still not getting it," said Jason. But he did. Hedwig turned to the waitress, and Jason knew what he would say. "My lady, may I present?" He raised his coffee cup, proclaiming, "The last descendant of Ichabod Crane."